we are going from cone to dome, with the volume up near the top.
Sure.
And this dome shape is known as the French Fardingale.
So transitioning from your background, and obviously you've been now, we'll get back to some of these questions related to your role at Marriott as well and what your plans are in the future. But in order to keep us on time, let's take a little snapshot of the hotel industry. And obviously 2015, I think the last time I talked to you, you were acquiring Starwood. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of competition for that. But then Airbnb came in with the late...
On-Bang or Airbnb?
I'm sorry, On-Bang. I apologize. Did that impact your strategy at all? Did you feel you needed to make the purchase and make sure that you got Starwood versus On-Bang?
So I can't believe it's been 5 years already.
I know, it's amazing, right?
That
You're still as handsome as you were 5 years
ago.
ago.
Yeah, and you haven't aged a bit. So that's all good. The the On-Bang piece of Starwood was interesting. Let me maybe back up for a step for those who aren't familiar with it. But Starwood was one of our principal competitors in the industry, and in early 15, I guess, they fired their CEO and they commenced a strategic review process. In other words, they put themselves up for sale. People will occasionally, often ask, why'd you buy Starwood? And one of the answers, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but only a little bit, is they were available for sale. And how often do you really get a meaningful competitor that has deliberately put themselves up for sale? Almost never. And so you've got to look really hard and say, what are the opportunities that I can achieve if we have this business as part of our platform? We can come back to that if it's of any interest. And so we ultimately jumped in, made an offer to buy. It was an ideal time because the other potential strategic buyers, our other competitors in the industry, for one reason or another, were not situated to be a very good buyer. One company was too small, another was still private, was about to list, and therefore didn't have the kind of currency that they needed. And so we were kind of the lone buyer, and we stepped in. We thought we got a very good deal. A Chinese insurance company, On-Bang, jumped in and made a proposal at the last minute, which was higher than ours. Of course, when the bid came in, I thought for sure that we had lost the deal. And I'm not sure this has changed that much in the last 5 years, but imagine bidding against, in effect, China Inc., right? They can spend whatever amount of money.
Whatever they want.
And to get a global platform in the lodging space, including a strong distribution in the United States and other parts of the world, we could see the attractiveness of that. So the first debate was, do we make another offer and try and get it back? Or do we, take our breakup fee and go off in a different direction? And I sort of pulled the team sort of pleaded for their unvarnished advice. Have we fallen in love with our own deal?
Right.
That we should pursue. And we ultimately decided, let's make a proposal that we would feel good about closing, but let's not chase it beyond that. And actually, for a mix of reasons, and very much to our surprise, we ended up succeeding.
Great. Well, from an outsider's perspective, if one is a corporate M&A lawyer, one wants to do M&A. So I would imagine the board might have had some differing opinions on whether you should continue to pursue this. Was that the case, or did everyone sort of fall into line eventually as long as you set the terms of when you pull away, the go, no go decision?
I think the board had the same question that I posed to our team, which is, have we fallen in love with the deal? Are we really pursuing a deal on terms that make economic sense for us, as well as, of course, strategic sense? By the time it ultimately got to making that proposal, and they saw what that proposal is, they were unanimous
in supporting it. So let's talk post-acquisition of Starwood. After that, you have Marriott, Starwood, and Ritz. You announced the loyalty programs are going to be consolidated into Bonvoy, which I love. I actually think Bonvoy is just a great brand. How hard was that? How hard was it in consolidating everything into the Bonvoy loyalty program?
it took a year and a half of solid work by hundreds of people, and the principal pieces of that were a technology platform that had to be capable of merging these two things, a set of rules that had to win over the loyalty of the SPG, the prior Starwood Programs loyalists, and then of course branding and naming of the new combined program.
Were the SPG loyalists one of the more difficult?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And we started trying to appeal to them before we closed the transaction. When the transaction was pending, I won't remember exactly in the details of what we did, but we basically came out and said, on the day we close the transaction, we will recognize your elite status if you have it on one side and the other side, and we will allow you to transfer points between the two programs. And do that on the day of closing. Initially, all the folks told me it was impossible to get done. But it was a way of essentially saying there is immediate good news for you, whether you're a Marriott Rewards member or an SPG member, and there's more good news coming down the pike.
Okay, so one of the questions that one of the students had around that, now that the Marriott branding continues to be built around Bonvoy, and for instance, just this week I received 2 emails regarding Bonvoy, even though I am a member, and asking me to double down on credit cards. Given that the loyalty program is such a strong value proposition for you guys, have you ever thought about renaming Marriott Bonvoy to go all in on that value proposition?
So it's a really good question, and I think it can be asked that way, or it could be asked the way we asked it internally. So when we were renaming a combined loyalty program, previously Marriott Rewards and SPG, which historically was Starwood Preferred Guest, but really known as SPG. The Starwood name did not exist on any single hotel brand, not nearly as old a name as Marriott, obviously. But we had some folks who loved the sort of independence and newness of the loyalty program, and said, why shouldn't we jettison the Marriott name? And my answer, and obviously ultimately prevailed, was Marriott name is extraordinarily well known.
Great.
And why would you give up the familiarity of that name or something which is a new word, word, right? It feels like Bon Voyage, so it probably works pretty well. I mean, we thought about that, but and I think the answer to the question is the same. The Marriott name is extraordinarily well known. It's filled with mostly good attributes from a customer perspective. So not something we need to run from. And as a consequence, I suspect it's something we'll hang on to.
Yeah, I would be shocked if you would have said something different than what you did, just looking at it from that perspective. Your revenue stream's largely built on management contracts with the property owners, and obviously the owners can decline the Marriott flag on the property and list with OTAs, these online travel agents like Booking.com and Expedia. Now, in this context, do you see OTAs as a bigger threat than some of the traditional incumbents that you face, the Hiltons or the Hyatts? And would you ever consider delisting from OTAs?
Well, let's see. There are a couple of good questions in that. The first question is, do we fear the OTAs as bigger threats than our lodging competitors? And I think the short answer to that is yes. The somewhat longer answer is not just the Expedias and Bookings of the world, but the Googles of the world. The tech platforms know an extraordinary amount about all of us. In Google's context, they know every place we search online. They know everything we look at. In Amazon's context, they know everything we buy. They know our preferences. They can often know them better than we know them ourselves. And their business model fundamentally is to get in the middle between the supplier and the customer and extract a tax, right? Might be as a percentage of sales, it might be an ad click, it might be a commission structure. There are lots of different structures, but they're trying to extract a tax. And obviously we don't want to pay that tax more than necessary, and we only want to pay it when it's bringing incremental business to us.
Sure.
And so the principal reason we went after Starwood was to say we need a bigger ecosystem so that our loyalty members can live within our ecosystem and not feel like they've got to go to Expedia or to Google and find a place that they want to travel.
And I think you guys were you pushed the direct bookings from 2015 to today much more so than I would argue anyone. So I'm sort of your ideal customer. I only go to the Marriott.com website when I want to book. And unfortunately, my wife goes to Expedia.com. So she's a problem for you. But I know I'm going to stay in a Marriott hotel anyway because I want the loyalty program. So I have no interest but searching Marriott, simply because I know the price that you're going to charge will be at or equal to anything I'll find anywhere else.
That's right.
And so I'm your ideal, and I know you have a loyal customer following, and obviously what you just said, having that footprint now just makes me a more loyal customer. The trouble is these infrequent leisure customers are where you're most likely losing a lot. At least some business. Forgetting COVID.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where the OTAs and Marriott are most aligned, right? Because if they can deliver us the occasional leisure customer who doesn't really have loyalty because it's not really in their interest to be in a loyalty program, right? And as a consequence, they're going to be less inclined to come to us directly. That's fine. But when they start to say, all right, we're going to pivot our model and get everybody, right, including the warrior, that's where it gets expensive for us. And so we've done things in the last few years to basically say, it's always been the case, you can't get loyalty points directly with us. You book Expedia, you're not getting any. But not only are we going to make sure you can't get the room rate lower someplace else, but we're actually going to give it to you lower on our side.
Right. And obviously that's been effective. Have other hotel chains matched your approach?
By and large, all of them have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I would have figured. One last question on the hotel industry before we transition. Airbnb filed for their anticipated IPO. What impact will this have in general on the travel industry? How do you think the institutional hotel companies, including you, will react from both a market and a non-market perspective? So think home rental brands, positioning, rewards programs on the market side, and then on the non-market side, lobbying, the use of social media or influencing.
Yeah. So Airbnb, I think, is going to price tomorrow. At least that's what the news is this morning said. And we'll immediately have another public company in our industry, broadly defined, maybe with a value bigger than ours. We'll be very close in it. I wouldn't surprise me if it had a bigger value. And I think the fact that they're public is not terribly revolutionary. It'd be nice to have more information about them and about their profitability. Interesting to us, we of course have combed through their offering documents. Their system-wide sales are less than half of ours. So by system-wide sales, that is the gross amount paid by all of the guests staying at Airbnb facilities compared to the gross amount paid by all of our hotel guests. We're at about close to 90 billion, I think, in 2019. We think they were at 37 billion or something like that. And so we'll end up doing a lot of that. We'll torture ourselves and sort of make comparisons. I think the more interesting thing is that they have opened up a new space, which is how do you get particularly the whole home rental, which has existed, for a long, long time, but how do you get it done in a digital world that allows a loyalty overlay, that allows a ease of booking, and they have taken some steps on that, but we've gotten into it too. Homes and Villas by Marriott, we'll go after this.
You say they're only half of your size. I still think that's 37 billion is a pretty big number. That's a pretty big company.
Yeah, it is.
And last question. Well, actually, two more here. Would you ever envision a scenario where Marriott lists on Airbnb?
No.
Okay.
And I can't imagine listing hotels on Hilton either.
Yeah, sure. But I think Airbnb is this kind of intermediary, a little bit different in terms of, you know, matching properties to demand in a way that Hilton would be different. But it's a question that was raised, and I thought it was an interesting question there. All right, last question, U.S. question in particular. The real estate club that David London is part of and helped arrange, I brought in two of my friends from Starwood, Jeff Dishner, who I think you know, the senior managing director, works under Barry, and Jeff DeModica, who runs another part of the Starwood business. Both of them were consistent in what they see, how the U.S. markets are transitioning away from the large urban environments of the New Yorks, the San Franciscos, the LAs, and the Bostons, toward in real estate in general, where people want to live. Places like the West, the mountain states, where there's favorable taxes at the state level, or desirable places to live because there's a lot of business that's been there. Are you guys looking at changes that are occurring in the U.S. in terms of demographic population shifts or employment shifts that are currently occurring, either because of COVID or for other reasons? And how are you guys planning that?
I mean, I think that the COVID impact is still obviously very new, and it'll be interesting to see how that lasts and evolves when the virus starts to recede. Clearly, you look at residential real estate and you see residential real estate in non-urban markets moving much more healthily and faster. And that's for obvious reasons. You look at where people vacation this summer, for example, not cities by and large, but coastal destinations, mountain destinations, resort destinations, and all of that is reasonably obvious why. You can drive to those places. You don't need to go into virus hotspots. You're not dependent on mass transit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Beyond the fact that why would you go to New York? The shows are all closed.
Right.
The restaurants are closed, et cetera. And of course, then you compound this with the fact that nobody's going to work, and nobody's going to the office, I should say. You know how Washington is. You go down to Washington in a weekday afternoon, and it's dead zone. The hotels are quiet, but the small businesses are closed and the offices are closed. What happens a year from now? I think we'll actually shift substantially back towards where we were before. Not all the way. I think remote work will be a more regular part of office workers' lives than it was before. Maybe that's a couple of days a week. But I think most companies will still value, most institutions will still value people coming in, building culture, collaborating, doing all sorts of other things. I think, we could poll this group, I suppose. I don't know how to do it technologically, but I think cities are still going to be very attractive places for people to live and start their careers, and probably build their careers. And we'll end up with the cities getting certainly more vibrant than they are today.
Yeah.
Take them a while to get back to where they were before.
Yeah. So I've heard, in this conditions of up to 5 years before we're back to where we once were, and in particular in the travel industry for both airlines and hotels. But you seem a little bit more optimistic there, and largely a return you're saying in about a year.
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, I think and obviously a lot of this is about the virus, which I'm not an expert on, but the bad news, of course, is the virus numbers today are awful. And as a consequence, the next number of months are likely to be pretty lousy from a business perspective, whether it's our business or lots of other businesses. But the good news is the vaccine. And by mid-year next year, it seems really probable that folks who want a vaccine will have been able to get a vaccine. And as a consequence, I think in 2021, we will see a step change back up, not to 2019 levels. I think to get back to 2019 levels is probably a good 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think